Now we start second plenary session. I give the floor to the Dr. Korchmaru Sergei.
Dear colleagues, the title of my report is Low-Density Polyethylene Degradation by Soil Microorganisms. As you can see from the title, it's about the problem of plastic pollution. Just a few remarks about why this problem is so significant. First of all, plastic waste is everywhere, literally. It's around us and it is in us. It is rapidly accumulating in our landfills. It pollutes our air, our soil, our water, and it gets inside us. It can, the small particles of plastic can penetrate even blood-brain barrier. So it's literally everywhere, and it is not just sitting there, it is toxic. Just think about that. Every day, according to some estimations, we can consume up to 80 grams of plastic, and it can penetrate our organs, it can penetrate our brain, and it has inflammatory action. So it is not a problem that can be ignored for sure. The third point has to do with the fact that this plastic in the environment and inside our bodies is very persistent, at least in the environment, is very persistent. In other words, there are no natural mechanisms that can help us to get rid of this disaster soon enough. And what makes things worse is that there are no sustainable waste disposal technologies. We do not have technologies that can help us to dispose plastic waste without creating even bigger environmental problems. So this tide wave, this tsunami wave of plastic may very soon overwhelm us and our world unless we do something with the problem and find a way to get rid of the threat. And one of the most promising directions in this way is biodegradation. At least this is the only environmentally safe solution that is practically visible right now. But as I said, plastic is very persistent. So natural mechanisms of degradation are extremely slow. And so we need mechanisms to accelerate those rates. In other words, we need a lot of research in this direction, and we're still in the very beginning of the process. Hence the objectives of our research. Objective 1 was to estimate the LDPE biodegradation rates in soil from two contrasting territories, a virgin forest and a landfill with plastics and other waste. Of course, LDPE is low-density polyethylene, and it was chosen because this is one of the most recalcitrant, most hard to be destroyed sorts of plastic. And the two soils that we selected come from contrasting territories. Our hope was that the very high microbiological biodiversity of the forest soil and the selective pressure of the polluted soil will increase the probability of finding microorganisms that can degrade plastic. Here you can see the properties of the soils that were used in our study. As you can see, the forest soil was indeed very rich in microbial activity, and the landfill soil had the level of microbial biomass almost 30 times smaller than the forest soil. And the metabolic quotient there, which is a very efficient indicator of stressful ecological conditions, was almost 100 times higher in the polluted soil. In other words, the selection pressure from plastic and other contaminants was really high in this case. This is how that polluted soil, landfill soil, looked like. And believe me, it smelled even worse. So our second objective was to test possibilities of accelerating the biodegradation rate. And we used several means first of all, nanocomposites. Also, we tried glucose amendments and phytoremediators. Of course, the selection of these means was not arbitrary. Nanomaterials are frequently suggested as means of stimulating biological degradation of plastics because they help to introduce oxygen into the carbon chain of plastic macromolecular, and they also help to facilitate the colonization of the surface of the plastic by microorganisms. Speaking about glucose, our hope was in the so-called priming effects. It is a very well-known fact that sometimes when glucose is added into soil or other substrates like glucose, that stimulates the degradation of recalcitrant or organic compounds in soil. And the term phytoremediator speaks for itself. Here you can see the properties of the nanocomposites we used. They were based on magnetite that was doped with cobalt and magnesium and stabilized by hydrophilic polymers. This is how the surface of LDPE looks when it is covered by those nanocomposites. A different picture. And this is how those nanocomposites help their microorganisms to colonize the surface of the LDPE. Of course, polyethylene is hydrophobic, and this is what creates problems with colonization. Well, results, well, first of all, we incubated LDPE strips with and without nanocomposites in both soils. The incubation period was 34 to 36 days, and by the end of the incubation, we checked the microbial activity. To make the long story short, I would say that we didn't see any changes in soil microbial activity that would allow us to even suggest that soil microorganisms could use LDPE as a source of carbon, could degrade LDPE either by themselves or with the help of nanocomposites. One of the cases is shown here, and you can see no statistical differences with the control in case when LDPE was present in soil. So we were not surprised to see that soil microorganisms by themselves could not degrade LDPE, but the fact that nanocomposites were not that efficient was something that was quite disappointing. But the things changed, at least in some cases, when we tried glucose. Again, to make long story short, we introduced glucose into every case with and without nanocomposites. We waited for 41 days and then measured the microbial activity. There were clear signs that the priming effects did occur because the soil organic matter content significantly decreased by the end of the incubation. And the fact that in the forest soil, the biomass in the presence of LDPE in soil, untreated in this case, was significantly, statistically 6.1% higher than in the control, gave us some reasons to hope that that increased biomass resulted from the stimulated biodegradation of plastic. When we looked at all the cases with nanocomposites and compared them to the control with pure untreated LDPE, we did not see any ability of the nanocomposites to stimulate the microbial biomass even more. And so we didn't really have hope to see any increased biodegradation of LDPE. And this expectation was confirmed by the measurements of the LDPE weight loss. As you can see, in the case with untreated LDPE, it was about 2.3%. And in all the cases with nanocomposites, it was either statistically the same or even lower. Now, let us consider this number, 2.3%. At the first sight, it looks like not a very impressive result. But if you consider several things, this may look different to you. First of all, it is a well-known fact that under standard conditions, as in our experiment, it takes from 2 to 10 years to reach 0.5 weight loss in LDPE. So while 2.3% is not too much, it's still a lot more than what usually happens in soil. So this was interesting for us because, as far as we know, this is the first case when it was demonstrated that glucose amendments can stimulate that much the biodegradation of LDPE in soil. And we're speaking about the forest soil. When we look at the landfill soil, the picture was quite different. When we introduced glucose, the priming effect was the same, but the untreated LDPE case was not statistically different from the control. So we did not expect much degradation in this case. But in the presence of nanocomposites, the things changed radically. Here we have not a 6% increase in soil microbial biomass, but increases were up to 50%. And this is a very significant increase in the biomass. So our hope was that we would see some degradation there in all those cases. And that was indeed so. If the untreated LDPE had the rate of 0.5% by the end of the incubation with glucose, in the cases with the nanocomposites, the best result was 2.5%. So we can see that nanocomposites, with the help of glucose, increased the biodegradation rate by more than 4 times. Again, that was quite an interesting result because, to the best of our knowledge, this is the first time when it was demonstrated that under soil conditions, glucose, when added at the level of 0.5%, can stimulate the efficiency of nanocomposites, at least in the cases of polluted soils. And now our tests with phytoremediators also showed some very good results. I don't really have much time for the details, so I will speak only about the soybean plants, where we had the most visible results. Just look at this root. This is soybean. This is the root of the plant that was grown in the forest soil without any pollutants. This is a virgin soil, and this is how the root looks like, at least in our vegetation experiments under the laboratory conditions. This is what happens with the plant when the seed is treated with a specific strain of rhizobia. Of course, you see some stimulation. But now look what happens if you take this seed covered with rhizobia and plant it into the same forest soil, contaminated with LDPE covered with some nanocomposites. You would expect suppression, but the reality was the opposite. Looks like the nanocomposites, in this case, turned LDPE into, or whatever, they created more favorable conditions for the soybean plants. And this is a very good sign, because increased biological activity of the polluted site is one of the primary goals of soil remediation. The situation with the landfill soil was similar. We have that the root length was increased with the help of nanocomposites. We have plus 51%, plant dry weight plus 44%, nodule number plus 17, plus almost 18%, as compared to the control with where the seeds were treated by the specific strain of rhizobia. Just think about that. Nanocomposites, when they are on the surface of LDPE, they stimulated not just the plant growth, but plant rhizobia symbiosis. That was really remarkable for us. And of course, we have a clear stimulation of LDPE weight loss. The only thing is that the best result in the LDPE weight loss was not in the same case where we had the best impact on soybean plants. Here we have all the best results that with LDPE degradation obtained. Within the forest soil, we can see that nanocomposites and plants did not really accomplish much in addition to glucose. But in the case of the landfill soil, a real soil polluted by plastic and many other contaminants, both glucose with nanocomposites and phytoremediated plants were very efficient. Well, I will not repeat all the conclusions. We'll just acknowledge that this research was funded by our agency. And thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't speak for too long. Okay.
Thank you. Your questions, please.
Yeah, and this is what our world will look like very soon, unless we do something with this problem. Doesn't look well.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
My question is, so these nanocomposites, they show to be efficient in this process of plastic degradation, but how do you think it is a risk of soil contamination with these nanomaterials?
It's a good question, really. At least right now, the use of nanomaterials for soil remediation is becoming more and more frequent. There are some suspicions, there are some doubts about whether those nanomaterials are environmentally safe. But so far, the general attitude is that the final result is more beneficial than harmful. But of course, we need to continue the study. At least in our case, we have 2 cases when the same result was achieved without nanocomposites. In one case, with the help of glucose, in the case of the forest soil, and in the case with the polluted soil with soybean plants. 2.5, 2.3% is not really an impressive result so far. So I would say that we are in the beginning of our research, and in the beginning, any means is welcome. We will see just which one is the most efficient in the end.
Thank you.
Another question, please. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Zienkovskaya Inga.
Thank you. I cannot start my camera because I don't have access from the host to show the video. I don't know why. I will start. Please confirm if you can see my presentation.
Yes.
In the full screen mode?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. It is nice to see you, and is already the traditional conference for me. I participate, I suppose, on the 4th conference already. Today, my presentation will be like the continuation of the last presentation, where it was the plastic, contamination of the environment with plastic. In our case, is contamination with heavy metals. So I would like to present the results which we obtained on the effect of zinc-containing effluents on the Spirulina platensis bioaccumulation capacity and biochemical composition. Speaking about water pollution, there are many sources which contribute to water pollution with different kind of pollutants. So nowadays we have have water pollution with organic compounds, heavy metals, radionuclides, and so on. Why heavy metals are so dangerous pollutants? Because they are persistent. It is no way to biodegrade these pollutants, and they tend to accumulate in a food chain. So if we have accumulation of the water, finally we will have accumulation of the food, and all these pollutants will be accumulated in our body. It is a wide range of industrial processes and also mining, some other activities which contribute to emission of large volumes of wastewater and heavy metals in the environment. So here there are indicated some of the processes which can contribute to the release of heavy metals in the environment. We have mining activity, we have different industrial processes, we have also agricultural practice and disposal of the waste. It is a range of heavy metals which can be released in the water, air, and soil, resulting in the pollution of the environment. There are some metals which have no biological functions, like, for example, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and so on, and their presence in the environment in high concentration, let's say, it is always dangerous. But there are some chemical elements, like, for example, zinc, chromium, nickel, which are required in small amounts for humans, but at the same time, they became toxic when they are generated in a large in a big concentration by different industrial processes. So in our case, we selected zinc as the element of the interest. Zinc, it is a very important micro element for humans, for microorganisms, for plants, and so on, playing many roles in activity of enzymes, in treatment of some diseases. At the same time, when we speak about zinc, which is generated by industrial processes, we have high concentration in wastewater of different galvanic processes, which can contribute to the pollution of water, and consequently they have a negative impact on the human health. In our case, like the bioremediator of wastewater polluted with zinc, we selected cyanobacteria. It is already known that cyanobacteria, they have a wide range of applications, starting from synthesis of nanoparticle, production of different biocompounds, which are very important for human health. And of course, one of the very important application of cyanobacteria is their application in environmental studies, mainly for bioremediation. Already it is well known that cyanobacteria, they can be applied for bioremediation of soil and bioremediation of water. So in our case, we selected Spirulina platensis as the object of study. Spirulina was obtained from the Institute of Microbiology and Biotechnology from Chisinau, and we already used spirulina for many times to test its absorption capacity, and it showed to be the excellent model for remediation of water which contain heavy metals, different kind of heavy metals. So in that case, we use mainly spirulina like biosorbent. It means what we use the dry biomass for all these experiments. In the present case, it was the bioaccumulation experiment when we cultivated spirulina for 5 days in the medium, which is SP1 medium, which is the characteristic for spirulina grow. And on the 5th day, we added zinc-containing effluents with different chemical composition and different metal concentration, and we grow spirulina the full cycle till the 6 days. When after that we filtrated this biomass, part of the biomass was used for biochemical tests, and part of the biomass was used for elemental analysis. Why we tested several types of synthetic effluents in this case? Because when we speak about wastewater, I suppose it is almost impossible to find a wastewater where we will have just one chemical element. Usually we have one element in a high concentration. Let's say in our case it is zinc. At the same time, usually this wastewater, they also contain another heavy metals, which are maybe in lower concentration, but at least they can have the same toxic or even more toxic effect on the environment. So biochemical tests which we performed, we determined the content of proteins, phycobilins, lipids, chlorophyll, beta-carotene, and we also determined the content of one of the products of oxidation of lipids. It was malondialdehyde. Elemental analysis, in case of elemental analysis, we just assess the bioaccumulation capacity of the spirulina biomass and the content of the elements in biomass we determined using neutron activation analysis on the IBR2 reactor. Here I presented the composition of analyzed systems which we used. We used 3 systems, 4 systems and 3 experimental variants. So what was the difference between these experimental variants? It was the difference just in the concentration of the elements. We analyzed system in which we have just zinc. It was a single metal system, and we analyzed 3 systems which were already complex systems containing copper, strontium, nickel, and barium, elements which we already detected what they can be found in the wastewater of the galvanic production. So we just didn't model this wastewater based of some our ideas. We model this wastewater based on the data which we obtained previously for real galvanic industrial effluents, which we analyzed. So here they are represented given the concentration of the element in all these effluents which we analyzed. As I previously mentioned, we determined the bioaccumulation capacity of spirulina biomass in this 4 analyzed system. And according to the data which we obtained, we can already mention what spirulina can be efficiently applied like bioaccumulator for not just for effluents containing the single element, but also for complex treatment of this wastewater. As example, in case of effluent which contain only zinc, the only element, increasing the concentration of zinc in this solution, also the increase of the uptake of this element by the spirulina biomass was observed. So we can say what the content of zinc in the biomass in experimental biomass in comparison with the control biomass increased up to 20 times. In case of another system, the increase of the zinc content, it was even more evidenced. It was like 21, 23 times compared to control biomass. The same, it was observed in the case of the other elements which we added in these synthetic solutions, like in case of copper, strontium, nickel. So concentration of all these elements in the biomass increased in comparison with the control sample. And here I would like to mention what some of the elements, like for example, strontium, barium, they were not detected in the control biomass, but they were efficiently accumulated in these experimental conditions. So spirulina can show what it can be efficiently used for treatment of complex wastewater with different chemical composition. But at the same time, since we work with living biomass, it was very important to assess how these heavy metals, they influenced the biomass productivity and how they influence the biochemical composition of the biomass. Since if we are speaking about spirulina or some other organisms like bioremediator, it means what they need to maintain the optimal conditions of life to work like bioremediator for many cycles, to not be used just once. So this is the process which is going in the nature. Speaking about the productivity of the biomass, you can see what even we added heavy metals in different concentration, it was not affected so significant by the presence of this heavy metal. So in case when just zinc was added in this cultivation media, so the spirulina was cultivated in the presence of zinc, this difference in the biomass amount between control and experimental variants, it was not statistically significant. But in case when we used already multi-component systems, we observed the decrease of biomass productivity. And since copper was one of the elements which was added in the systems, and we previously showed what copper has a toxic effect on spirulina even in very low concentration, we can suggest what presence of the copper in these complex systems, it can be one of the reasons why amounts of the biomass decrease. And you may see what the decrease was most significant in the case when the highest concentration of the metals was applied, but at least it was not more than 11% in all these analyzed systems. Speaking about content of the proteins, they were affected more significant by the presence of heavy metals in the cultivation media. If in case of zinc system containing only zinc ions, we can see what it was on the level of the control biomass, or even the content of the proteins increase. We cannot see the same situation in other systems where we are speaking already about effect of several elements on the spirulina proteins content. In this case, it was like at higher concentration. The higher was the concentration of the elements in the system, the more pronounced was the decrease of the protein content in the biomass. So in this case, we can speak already about the decrease ranging from 10% in case of the low concentration of element to like to 25-30% in case when the high concentration of the elements was applied. So speaking about the concentration in case of zinc, it was 10 milligram per liter concentration. Phycobilins were mostly affected by the presence of the heavy metals in in the cultivation medium. In all cases, we observed what the content of phycobilins in biomass decreased, and if in case, let's say, of zinc containing system, it was not so pronounced, but even in this case, we have a decrease like by 15-20%. So in case of the multi-component system, this decrease was more pronounced. And in case of high concentration of heavy metals in the cultivation media, the phycobilins content, it was decreased significantly, and it constituted just about 12% of the total content of phycobilins, which is characteristic for spirulina biomass. So it was the most evident toxic effect. It was expressed in the case of the decrease of the phycobilins content. Speaking about carotenes and chlorophyll, they were not so affected by the presence of heavy metals in the cultivation media. So you may see what in case of the carotene, in zinc system containing only zinc ions, we have even the increase of these pigments in content in the biomass in comparison with the control. But even in multi-component system, it was almost on the level of the control biomass. So it is so carotenes, they show the resistance to this concentration of heavy metals which were added in the cultivation media. At the same time, chlorophyll already was affected. The content of the chlorophyll was affected. It was not so significant what in case of phycobiliproteins, but even in this case, we have a reduction like by 20-25%, like the most significant reduction of the chlorophyll content in spirulina biomass. The next parameters which we traced, it was the content of the lipids. Lipids, they behaved very different depending on the systems which was analyzed. So, for example, in systems containing only zinc ions, we observed the increase of the lipid content in comparison with the control. In case when low concentration of zinc was added in the cultivation medium, it was 2.5 milligram per liters, and on the high concentration, 5 and 10 milligrams per liter, it was on the level of the control biomass. In case of two systems, three component systems, zinc copper strontium and zinc copper nickel, you may see what increase in the concentration of heavy metals in the cultivation media led to reduction of the content of lipids in the biomass. But at the same case, when we speak about four component system, we firstly observed the reduction of the lipid content, and after that it was an increase, even it was higher at high concentration compared to lipids content in the control. We also traced the content of malondialdehyde as one of the products of the oxidative reduction of lipids. And you may see what in all cases it increase in comparison with the control biomass is like the indication of the toxic effect of these heavy metals which were added in this cultivation media. And it was more pronounced in the systems which contain copper. It is well known what heavy metals, one of the toxic effects of the heavy metals is generation of reactive oxidant species, which have a toxic effect on the microorganism. So in case of the systems which contained copper ion, this process was even more active, like conclusion, the content of malondialdehyde was increased more pronounced in this system containing copper ions. But in any case, spirulina was able to resist these conditions, and it maintained relatively spirulina was able to resist these conditions, which stress conditions, let's say, which were created with the wastewater which were added in the cultivation medium, and the content of the pigments like carotene and chlorophyll, it was maintained on the level which is let's say spirulina can survive having this content of these pigments. Phycobiliproteins, they were mainly affected by the presence of the heavy metals in analyzed systems. Spirulina showed the high accumulation capacity for the elements which are present in the analyzed system, and we can make as a conclusion, like the final conclusion, what spirulina can be regarded like one of the potential bioremediator of wastewater which are polluted with heavy metals in concentrations in the range from 0.5 to 10 milligram per liters. Thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Inga, for your report. Good question, please.
I have a question. From your report, it looks like spirulina is like a sponge. It actively absorbs heavy metals and probably other pollutants from the media. So why would it do that? Do you have any ideas? Why to accumulate the toxic compounds within the cells?
First of all, there are a lot of functional groups which can be involved in this process of metal accumulation. Because when we speak about metal accumulation, we have two processes, at least. We have metal sorption and metal accumulation inside. Yes, so some of these ions, metal ions, they can be just catch to the surface, to these functional groups on the surface of spirulina biomass. Some of they can be accumulated through the special chains, because spirulina accumulates some elements which are very important for living. So heavy metals, they can be accumulated using the same chains inside in the cells. And they can be already incorporated, they can be bound to lipids, to proteins, and some other biomolecules inside the cell.
So this is not an active process, this is just a byproduct.
No, in case of when we are using living biomass, is an active process. Okay. In case when we have dead biomass, in this case, we can say what spirulina is like the sorbent, like activated carbon. But in case of this experiment, it was an active process. Okay, then my following question is, we know the spirulina is widely used as a supplement. And to me, it means that unless a very pure environment is used for growing spirulina, those supplements can be potentially polluted by heavy metals and probably other pollutants. Is this problem real? Do you know anything about that? What kind of supplements? You mean the salts which are used for spirulina growth? Well, biologically active supplements that people use to increase their health. You know, I suppose there are different way of the experiments performing. So in our case, the idea was to test if spirulina can be used like the bioremediator. In case when there are supplements with spirulina, they are growing in special conditions. Elements are added in the concentration to have the optimal amount of the spirulina. And of course, we need to have very safe biomass in case when we use it like the supplement. Spirulina, which we obtained after wastewater treatment, of course, you cannot use it as a supplement, but we performed some experiments and we showed what spirulina is able to grow for many cycles in this metal polluted environment. So this spirulina, which we obtained, it can be used again in this wastewater for remediation, but we are not planning to use it like the supplement for humans to use it.
Oh, that was not my question. This is a common problem that those biologically active supplements, when they tested on heavy metals, they may have increased concentrations of them.
It is possible, but
as a result, it is not safe to use just any supplement that you see in the store. But I wondered if this problem is big in the cases of spirulina, since they are so actively involved in accumulating heavy metals from the
it depends strongly of the conditions in which spirulina was grown, because for example spirulina, which we use from Institute of Microbiology and Biotechnology, it is really very clean. We performed this multi-elemental analysis which allow us to determine around 45 elements in spirulina biomass, and we didn't detect any toxic elements in the control spirulina biomass, so we can be sure what it is growing in a very good conditions. But when we speak about some other producers, of course, nobody is giving like the guarantee what spirulina was growing according to the protocol, and they used high quality these minerals to grow spirulina biomass. In any case, it should be just tested to prove if it is clean or it contains some heavy metals, high concentration of heavy metals.
Yeah, thank you. So the conclusion is that our spirulina is safe.
Yes.
Thank you. Other question? The next reporter is Zhukovskaya Ludmila. She has sent the recorded presentation.
Dear colleagues, let me present to your attention a presentation Influence of Cultivation Conditions on the Growth and Formation of Pseudoarthrobacter scleroma cholesterol oxidase. The present work was carried out in the Institute of Microbiology of the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus. Cholesterol oxidase is a monomeric bifunctional flavin adenine deep nucleoside dependent enzyme belonging to oxidoreductase family and catalyzing oxidation of 3-beta-hydroxysteroids and isomerization of intermediate 5-choles 3,1,2,4-choles 3,1 to yield hydrogen peroxide. Cholesterol oxidase catalyzes the initial degradation of cholesterol and probably other natural sterols used as carbon sources for growth of various microorganisms. Cholesterol oxidase is engaged in clinical diagnostics to evaluate cholesterol level in blood, other biological fluids, foodstuffs, and fabrication of biosensors. The reports of World Health Organization point out cardiovascular diseases as one of the main causes of human mortality around the globe. Elevated levels of cholesterol and derived esters in plasma, hypercholesterolemia, are responsible for atherosclerotic pathological changes in blood vessels, leading to cardiovascular malfunctions. On the contrary, low cholesterol levels, hypocholesterolemia, are likewise hazardous to health and may induce cancer, depression symptoms, respiratory problems. Taking into account the above-mentioned considerations, it is vital to control cholesterol levels at the early stage of the pathology. Owing to high sensitivity and specificity, the enzyme cholesterol oxidase is widely used to determine serum cholesterol concentrations. Also, cholesterol oxidase used as precursors of steroid hormones, insecticidal and antimicrobial agent. According to literature data, the main cholesterol oxidase producers are strains referred to general Rhodococcus streptomyces brevibacterium. Taking into account a broad spectrum of enzyme application, the studies to seek new highly active sources of cholesterol oxidase are extremely relevant and vital. Earlier, we performed screening of bacterial strains synthesizing extracellular cholesterol oxidase using plate method based on growing bacteria on differential diagnostic medium containing cholesterol and selection of the variants showing the maximum enzyme generation activity. Aim of the present study: investigation of the effect of cultural conditions on growth of Pseudoarthropteris scleroma and cholesterol oxidase production. As a result, the impact of initial pH of the nutrient medium from 5 to 10, temperature from 26 to 30 degrees centigrade, time of culture from 48 to 96 hours was assessed. Analysis of growth and cholesterol oxidase biosynthetic capacity by Pseudoarthropteris scleroma showed that in the course of fermentation, active acidity of the nutrient medium tended to rise by 0.36 to 0.71 from the initial pH value from 5 to 9 and fell by 0.55 from the starting pH 10, staying within the range from 7.71 to 9.45. Protein concentration upon the end of fermentation reached from 8.21 to 40.05 milligram per milliliter. It should be noted that this parameter was sliding up with the increase of initial pH of the medium. As to biomass concentrations, its level varied by the final day of the culture from 27.86 to 30.97 milligram per milliliter. As for cholesterol oxidase generation capacity, it was recorded that at initial pH of the medium 8, maximum cholesterol oxidase activity was found. Initial pH values 5 and 6 decreased cholesterol oxidase productivity twofold. Further pH fluctuations resulted in more drastic losses of enzyme biosynthesis. Examination of the effects of temperature on enzyme production revealed that peak amount of cholesterol oxidase was generated at 28 degrees centigrade. The study of correlation of enzyme productivity with time of the culture demonstrated that optimal period for cholesterol oxidase biosynthesis equals 72 hours. More prolonged culture lasting up to 96 hours failed to augment enzyme use. Thus, it may be concluded that the optimal parameters for growth of pseudoarthobacter scleroma and secretion of extracellular cholesterol oxidase are 72-hour culture at temperature 28 degrees centigrade and initial pH of the nutrient medium 8. Thank you for attention.
Okay, thanks. Our next speaker is Ungureanu Irina, and she will report on what sounds very intriguing, at least to me. Bioactive glass coatings synthesized by maple for enhanced performance of medical implants. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is it visible?
Yeah, just that, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Irina Ungureanu, from the National Institute for Lasers, Plasma and Radiation Physics in Romania, Măgurele, and today I'll be presenting my work regarding bioactive glass coating synthesized by matrix-assisted pulse laser evaporation for enhanced performance of medical implants. Any device that is implanted in the human body is prone to infections caused by bacteria, which affect the healing of bones and even weaken the implant. These infections occur as a result of the attachment of bacteria to the implant surface.
We cannot hear you. Sorry. We can see you, but we don't hear you, and we don't see your screen. Okay.
Now? Is
Yes.
it visible now?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a problem with the internet connection here, so sorry. Okay. The resistance of antibiotics generates both loss of human lives and significant economical burden. It is predicted by the year 2050, approximately 51 million deaths will be recorded all over the globe because of the antibiotic resistance. Currently, to prevent implant-associated infections, there are various strategies, from the sterilization techniques to prophylactic medicine, modification of implant surfaces by means of multifunctional coatings, and international Strategies to combat antibiotic resistance are carried out on several levels, such as reduce the use of antibiotics to discover new antibiotics and substances with antibacterial impact, and the controlled and local administration of medicines. Therefore, in my work, I choose to combine strategies for modifying the implant surface with substances with antimicrobial effect. As it is known, the majority of infections are treated with systemically administered antibiotics, which usually do not reach the site of infections. Furthermore, in the case of bone infections, blood flow is usually reduced because bones are weak perfused organs. Therefore, locally administered antibiotics for the treatment of bone infections have several advantages over the systemic administration, such as reducing the adverse effects, the risk of overdose, and of course, antibiotic resistance. As a result, the surface of an implant can become a multifunctional system which responds to microbiological signals by releasing antimicrobials. In this study, we cover titanium substrates which mimic the surface of implants with thin films from bioactive glasses, ciprofloxacin, and polymethyl methacrylate by means of maple techniques with the aim of delivering drugs to the infected sites and to improve biocompatibility. The presence of the bioactive glass will ensure good adhesion to the neighboring tissues. Polymethyl methacrylate will substantially improve mechanical properties and increase corrosion resistance. Ciprofloxacin will delay, prevent, and treat microbial contamination. The thin films were made in 2 steps. In the first step, we deposited polymethyl methacrylate and over it the layer of bioglass and ciprofloxacin. The maple experiment can be described as follows. The organic compound is dissolved in a solvent. The solution obtained is being frozen and then irradiated, thus avoiding the direct exposure of organic molecules to the laser radiation. The maple technique is characterized by a relative simplicity. The target and the collecting substrates are placed plan parallel in a deposition chamber, which can be pressurized. A pulse generated by a krypton fluorexcimer laser source enters the deposition chamber and hits the target. Both the solute and the solvent molecules leave the target from the area illuminated by the laser pulse, transferring the substance of interest to the substrate where it forms a thin film. In table 1, I collected the experimental parameters for the maple deposition of the mentioned thin films. To study the insertion of implants into the human body and the phenomena which occur at the tissue implant interface as the result of an interaction with the physiological fluids, the coated titanium substrates were immersed in simulated body fluid. Before immersion into simulated body fluid, the stoichiometry of the thin films was investigated by FTI air. The thin films retained the composition of the base components as demonstrated by these spectra. At the peaks belonging to bioglasses, polymethyl methacrylate and ciprofloxacin in powder and thin films were identified. For the thin film, only for the thin film, the analysis revealed the peaks representative only for polymethyl methacrylate and ciprofloxacin. The microtopography of the thin films is observable from scanning electron microscopy images. Uniform morphology can be observed with spherical, ovoid, or elongated formations of variable sizes. These are representative for pulse laser deposition methods. Moreover, micrometric droplets are scattered arbitrarily around over the entire surface. They have actually a favorable result on cell adhesion and growth and proliferation of cells according to the literature. And the estimated thickness of the thin film was approximately 2 micrometers. From the AFM images, it can be seen that we analyzed by AFM 2 areas of the coating, and it can be seen from the sample 1 that the area 1, that this area exhibits clusters with particles having sizes of 300 nanometers, while the area 2 exhibits large clusters incorporating particles of approximately 200 nanometers. Data on roughness values of the thin films before the immersion in simulated body fluid are collected in table 2 and are in good agreement with scanning electron microscopy observation regarding the surface roughness and the presence and sizes of the particles. The surface suitability studies comprises the contact established between a liquid, in our case simulated body fluid, in the form of a drop, and a solid, uncoated or coated sample. This contact angle measurement is a reliable parameter for the characterization of biomaterials, since the hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity of surfaces are of great interest for cell adhesion and proliferation. In figure 9, it is shown a representative image of the contact angle measured on coated and uncoated samples. The uncoated titanium sample was the least hydrophilic and showed a contact angle of 115.79 degrees, while the coated sample achieved a remarkable improvement in hydrophilicity. The high hydrophilicity of this surface of an implant in general increases the contact of the bone cells with the surface of the implant, which leads to a rapid and long-term osseointegration and improves the healing of hard and even soft tissue wounds. As I previously mentioned, I inserted the samples into simulated body fluid and tested it after different immersion times. After this, I collected some images on the films after 21 days of immersion, and as it observed, the film consists of a rather smooth matrix covered with scattered and micronic spheroidal particles, isolated, arbitrarily agglomerated, probably which come from the biological appetite. This biological appetite comes from the dissolution of biogas into simulated body fluid. In parallel with the same images, AFM show areas with particles which are unevenly distributed on the surfaces. The topography is characterized by a roughness in the range of 0.2 to 0.3 micrometers. The liquid that contained the samples was analyzed after the various immersion times. The drug release kinetics was studied for a prolonged period of 21 days, and it can be seen that the antibiotic is released at a constant rate throughout the 21-day of immersion interval. Moreover, this process suggests that the gradual bioglass dissolution in simulated fluid is simultaneous with the release of the antibiotic. Here there is an international demand to design drug delivery systems which allow longer release periods. For example, the treatment time for patients which have bone infection caused by bacteria is usually at least 4 to 6 weeks, which is in interval of the 21 days of our testing. This, however, is an important reason in favor of topical treatment compared to oral ones due to the prolonged storage of the drug in our maple deposited layer. FTIR spectra of our films after 2, 8 hours and 1, 3, 7, and 21 days of immersion in simulated body fluid shows that the surface transformation of the thin films were observed even after the first day of immersion, indicating the dissolution of bioglass into and formation of the carbonated apatite layer. Next, we wanted to see if our films kill the osteoblast cell types, which they come in contact. As you can be seen from the image, the staining of the actin filaments in osteoblasts revealed almost similar cell densities on both coated and uncoated samples after 24 hours of incubation. The images reveal the presence of cell junctions on the tested samples established by the numerous lamellipodia and filopodia, and these structures confirm good cell adhesion. The MTT viability assay are in agreement with the fluorescence microscopy, with the level of viable cells being almost similar to both control and coated samples. Their biocompatibility was also validated by the grease test, as nitric oxide levels did not increase. We also tested the antimicrobial potential of the thin films on 2 strains, which are recognized as an important part of implant-associated infections. The microbial potential of the films was tested against S. aureus and F. ecaris. As you can be seen, the uncoated titanium had no inhibitory effect on the gram-negative bacteria tested, while the films obtained by maple interfere with the growth of the bacterial strain. A decreased number in the viable cells being observed even after 45 minutes of initial contact. And conclusions: the potential of our coatings to bone tissue is demonstrated by the presence of the hydroxyapatite layer. The maple process coating proved to be a good candidate for designing efficient implant surfaces. Our coating successfully inhibited gram-negative bacterial growth with no harm on osteoblast cells. As a general conclusion, our coating is promising in terms of its bioactivity and may be applied for potential applications for bone repair and tissue engineering. In bone surgery, for example, it offers more possibility to adapt it to some bone metabolic activities with a rapid bone material interface if that is necessary. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting report. Are there any questions? No questions? Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Lesnik Evelina. The floor is yours.
My name is Evelina Lesnik. I'm representing I'm representing a group of scientists from the State University of Medicine and Pharmacy, and I will present our common report on correlation between the immune indicators in patients with pulmonary drug susceptible and multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. In the Republic of Moldova, tuberculosis remains an important public health problem. Moldova is among the countries within the European region with the highest global incidence of tuberculosis, and actually we have around 48 at 100,000 population of patients with tuberculosis. However, before the COVID crisis, the global rate was around 83 at 100,000 population, which means during this COVID period we have reduced the number of TB patients due to a lot of reasons. Also, Republic of Moldova is listed within the list of the WHO, which is high burdened by the MDR-TB. MDR-TB means multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, and means that the patients are infected with drug-resistant strains, which are resistant against the first-line anti-TB drugs. In general, the evolution of TB and final treatment outcome reflect the organism capacity to activate the main immune response, which is based on cell-mediated immunity according to the virulence of Mycobacteria tuberculosis. The major effector cells of cell-mediated immunity are the CD3 and CD4 cells. The natural immunity represented by the macrophages, dendritic cells, neutrophils, natural killer cells has the role to balance the protective and pathologic immune factors leading to lung destruction, chronic inflammation of the lung, and of course severe outcome. The humoral immunity has a secondary role in the immune response against Mycobacteria tuberculosis, synthesizing the antibodies by CD19 or as we call B lymphocytes. The aim of the study was to assess the correlation between the cell-mediated immunity, humoral immunity, and innate resistance indices in patients with drug-susceptible and multi-drug resistant TB. The study was analytical, prospective, case control, which included 129 patients diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis, which were distributed in the control group, which included 57 new cases with drug-susceptible TB, and study group, which included 72 cases with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis confirmed by cultural methods. This study group was distributed in two subgroups. First subgroup included 41 patients with primary MDR-TB, which means that those patients were never treated for TB. And the second study group included 31 MDR-TB cases, which acquired the drug resistance during the anti-TB treatment course. So the patients, all patients were investigated according to the requirements of the national clinical protocol actually available for the management of patients of tuberculosis, and as well immune indicators were done in the immunological and allergological laboratory of the Institute of Physiopneumology. To assess the functional activity of cellular immunity, we performed the reaction of blast transformation of lymphocytes to two types of mitogens, phytohemagglutinin and tuberculin. To assess to quantify the CD3 and CD4 lymphocytes of the immune blood cells, we phenotyped the immune cells by flow cytometry. To assess pre-immune resistance, we calculated the phagocytic index and phagocytic number. To assess the functional activity of neutrophils, we performed the test of the reduction of nitroblue-tetrazolium salt. The concentration of immunoglobulins in the blood serum was determined using the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. Our results. Distributing patients by gender, we identified the predominance of men compared to women in all groups. Characterizing the age groups, we revealed that the largest part of all groups were aged between 18 and 44 years old. However, the rate of younger people was higher in the patients primarily infected with drug-resistant strains. All patients were diagnosed with pulmonary infiltrative tuberculosis. Extensive tuberculosis to more than 3 segments were found statistically more frequent in the patients which acquired drug resistance during the anti-DP treatment. The bilateral involvement of both lungs as well predominated statistically in the group which developed multi-drug resistance during the anti-DP treatment. Lung destruction was established as an important feature for actual strains of mycobacteria in a higher proportion of patients with drug-susceptible TB, which is something that is newly or actual tendency, and in those who acquire the MDR-TB during the anti-TB treatment. The disseminated opacities, which were associated to infiltrative opacities, were more frequently identified in patients who acquired the MDR-TB during the treatment. So all patients were confirmed by cultural methods to be infected with Mycobacterium tuberculosis. However, the rate of AFB positive patients, which means were bacillary positive patients, were more frequently in the group with secondary MDR-TB who acquired the drug resistance during the treatment. Assessing the clinical signs in all groups, we identified that that longer duration of asthenia, weight of loss, fever or feverish was identified in the second study group who acquired drug resistance during the anti-TB treatment, and among the clinical signs of bronchopulmonary syndrome predominated the longer duration of cough with mucopurulent expectoration. In the second study group who acquired the MDR-TB predominated the most severe signs such as dyspnea, chest pain, and hemoptysis. For the quantitative and qualitative assessment of the cellular immunity, lymphocytes were used to be evaluated. So the functional activity of lymphocytes evaluated according to the blast transformation test to fetal hemagglutinin and tuberculin was identified more reduced indicators in all groups of patients. However, the lowest levels were identified in patients who acquired the MDR-TB. The level of CD3 cells identified a lower indicator in all groups. However, it was something specific. The lowest level was identified in patients who were primarily infected with MDR-TB strains. The proportion of CD19 cells, or as we call B lymphocytes, was statistically high in all study groups. However, the level was higher in patients who acquired the MDR-TB. The immunoglobulins G was significantly lower in all study groups. However, the lowest level was identified in those with MDR-TB, regardless of the moment when the MDR was created. The EGA concentration was higher in all study groups. However, no statistical difference were identified between the groups, and the EGM also was higher. However, the highest level was established in those who primarily were identified with MDR-TB. As well, it's important to establish that the antimycobacterial antibodies were in a similar higher level in all groups of the patients without differences between the patients regarding the drug susceptibility test. To assess the innate resistance, we evaluated the phagocytic number and phagocytic index, and we identified a lower level of all indicators being identified a statistical difference between the first study group and second study group, but using the functional test of the reduction of nitrobutyrate salt, we didn't identify any changes in our selected patients. We identified, we calculated the Pearson's correlation coefficient to assess the correlation between the immunological parameters and the duration of the clinical signs and radiological manifestations. And according to the results, we identified a strong negative correlation between the rate of CD3 lymphocytes and the results of the blast transformation reaction by tuberculin, with the extension of lung destruction in the lung and the duration of hemoptysis, which are the most relevant indicators which indicate the severest forms of TB. We established a moderate positive correlation of severe forms of TB, a moderate positive correlation between CD9 cells, B lymphocytes, and lung destruction and the duration of hemoptysis. We identified a moderate positive correlation between immunoglobulin M and severe forms of TB and lung destruction, and a very negative correlation we identified between phagocytic index and number with lung destruction, hemoptysis, and severe forms of TB. So in general, a very weak correlation or even lack of correlations were identified between signs of intoxication syndrome, dyspnea, and chest pain with all immunological parameters. We assess the correlation between immune indicators between them, and we identified as highly strong and positive correlation with the levels of blast transformation reaction by phytohemagglutinin and CD3 lymphocytes in all group, a low and positive correlation between the levels of blast transformation reaction by tuberculin and CD3 in all groups, moderate negative correlation between the levels of blast transformation into phytohemagglutinin and CD19 cells in all groups, and a low negative correlation between blast transformation reaction by tuberculin and CD9 lymphocytes in all groups, and a moderate negative correlation between phagocytic number and blast transformation reaction by phytohemagglutinin in all groups, as well as between phagocytic number and reaction of blast transformation test by tuberculin, and very low negative correlations between phagocytic numbers and phagocytic index with CD3 and CD9 in all groups. In general, we can say that clinical and laboratory parameters indicated that the most severe evolution of pulmonary tuberculosis is identified in MDR-TB patients, especially in those who acquire the multi-drug resistance during the anti-TB treatment. The severity of clinical and radiological data in patients with MDR-TB, especially in those who acquired MDR, was confirmed by the most severe immune deficiencies according to the quantitative and qualitative indicators of the cellular immunity and pre-immune resistance. The hyperactivity of humoral immunity in terms of quantitative indicators of CD19 cells and the level of antimicrobacterial antibodies testified that the body's capacity have the tendency to reduce the cell-mediated deficiencies regardless of the drug susceptibility or resistance of mycobacteria. So we identified a negative correlation between CD3 and blast transformation reaction on PPD and phagocytic index and number with the radiological signs, which indicate severe evolution of tuberculosis, such as lung destruction, hemoptysis, and the extensive forms of TB. A strong positive correlation between CD19 and AGM were identified with signs of severe evolution of TB listed before. Weak correlations between indicators of intoxication syndrome, dyspnea, chest pain with all immunological parameters with higher values in patients who acquire the MDR-TB. The indices of cell-mediated immunity positively correlated between them. positively correlated as well the blast transformation reaction and negative. So positively correlated blast transformation reaction by phytohemagglutinin and negative by blast transformation reaction by tuberculin with CD3, and negative correlated CD3 and CD19 with phagocytic number more stronger in MDR-TB patients, especially in those who acquired the multi-drug resistance. In general, we can establish that the immune state in patients with TB, of pulmonary TB, should be performed in the early stages of the disease for the promptly start of immunocorrective treatment and to correct the metabolic disorders which could improve the quality and effectiveness of the anti-TB treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, please? I have a question, if possible. You said several times that TB treatment causes multi-drug resistance. Is this the treatment itself or mistreatment that is the real cause? I mean, sometimes when we stop using antibiotics too early, that causes resistance or other forms of mistreatment. So my question is the treatment itself that causes drug resistance or deviations from the treatment procedures?
Okay, thank you for your question. I understood it's a very important topic for our research to establish the causes and the risk factors which are contributing to developing the drug resistance. Our patients who acquire the MDR-TB were identified with new strains of mycobacteria which were resistant to first-line anti-TB drugs after 5 months of the treatment. So during this period, they were treated with first-line anti-TB drugs of the standard treatment for drug-susceptible TB. However, due to the fact that they, according to the radiological science, they have a more severe course. So first of all, they have lung destruction, both lung involvement, and probably disseminated focuses in other organs, which contribute to developing the resistance during the standard treatment for drug-susceptible TB. So first of all, the main cause of the drug resistance in our study, of course we cannot generalize, is the clinical particularities of the patients, because they had a more severe evolution as they were treated standardized using standardized treatment for tuberculosis. So no immunocorrective treatment were added, and the immune disturbance were not targeted by the treatment. However, for the general pool of the patients, as we can say for the Republic of Moldova, which is confronted with a high rate of patients who drop out of the treatment, who interrupt or require the individualization, we can identify that individualization or lack of compliance to the treatment could lead to acquirement of drug resistance. So we have different aspects of this phenomenon of acquiring the drug resistance, and of course we try to target with different studies.
So if I understood correctly, it is both the treatment itself in some cases and the mistreatment, the deviation from the treatment that is the cause. And if I understood correctly, it is your correlations that allow to recognize before time that this treatment may lead to drug resistance. And with the help of your correlations, you can prevent that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, so why we perform those correlations? First of all, we have to identify the criteria according to which we can establish the possibility or to predict the development of drug resistance. Then we would like to introduce those criteria in algorithms for prevention and prognosis of development.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and probably for the next.
That's really interesting. Have you tried to use your correlations for predicting? Have you tested your assumptions?
For predicting the acquirement of drug resistance, we will use So we at the onset of the study.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Regarding the particularities, may I ask you if you have got patients immunoconformist in your studies, like patients on antiretroviral therapy or immunosuppression therapy?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Correctly, I should describe the inclusion and excluding criteria. It was not done, of course. So I should emphasize that in those groups were not included the patients with HIV infection. This was the most important excluding criteria. Of course, those are completely specific patients and patients treated with corticosteroids or antineoplastic drugs or other immunomodulators who reduced the immunity. So the patients were, we can say, standard-like patients, which we have in our clinical practice without deviations.
But in general, do you have patients on immunosuppression? Patients after the organ transplants, for example?
No. No. So, of course, we know about the immunomodulator, which is called blockant of anti-TNF alpha, who contribute to development of severe disseminated forms of TB. However, this drug is not available, infliximab is not available on our market. Patients are treated with corticosteroids, and that's why to establish some group of patients to be evaluated, we cannot. So we used our Moldovan patients.
Dar cum trec prin coronavirus persoanele cu
Thank you for your question. So there is a specific evolution of tuberculosis during the COVID pandemic. So we identified the reduction with 40% of the number of patients, and several causes were identified. First of all, the barriers to access the healthcare services. This is the most important. So the patients were blocked in their houses. The staff was reoriented to the staff specialized in physiopneumology was reoriented to perform the healthcare to the COVID patients, and probably and other factors associated with the mortality due to COVID reduced the number of the patients. How the evolution of COVID and tuberculosis. Actually, we have a running research granted by Academy of Science, which is ongoing at the Institute of Pneumophysiology. So there are two types of groups that we now we are identifying, assessing. First of all, the patients with tuberculosis who were infected with COVID. And there is another group of the patients who were treated for COVID, of course, with corticosteroids, and who developed tuberculosis in several months after the curing the COVID. So this is important to identify the evolution of tuberculosis. In patients who were diagnosed with tuberculosis and infected with COVID infection, of course, the evolution was, of course, worse. The mortality we cannot establish because the number of patients was low, and in general, such treatments as corticosteroids, which is widely used in COVID, was not applied. Yes, because it's mycobacterial infection is related with contraindication for corticosteroids. However, the patients with COVID who were intensively treated with corticosteroids in a moment of their life, in 3-6 months, developed we cannot say reactivation of tuberculosis, however, a new episode of tuberculosis. And they are treated standardized.
Thank you. Any more questions? Then we have a break and we meet at 1:30 at the green biotechnology section. Thank you very much and see you in a little bit.
Break.